This week and next week we'll learn how to do load tracing, and we'll begin by applying those principles to a more simple kind of structure, a deck, like you might find on any house. So in a deck, if you look at what is in a deck, you'll notice that whatever fancy shape it is, it has basically the same arrangement. You have some kind of decking on top, and under that you have joists, and those are at right angles to the decking. And under the joists you have some beams holding those up, and those are at right angles to the joists, and so forth. So each layer, as you go down, is at right angles to the layer above it. Now, figuring out the sizes in a deck is one kind of activity where you can actually get good, reliable information from those how-to-do-it books like you might find at, I don't know, Jerry's or those kinds of places. I think some of these pictures I have here were from the Ortho book of how to build a deck, and some of them are from a Sunset book, how to build a deck. They all have tables that let you look up sizes, so that's pretty useful. Whatever book you're using, you go through this process. First you lay out your preliminary floor plan, what shape and size do you want it to be, and you figure out what kind of wood you're going to use, because that makes a difference. Is it pine, is it redwood, so forth. Then you use those tables to figure out if you want to use a certain size of wood, how far apart do the supports have to be, and you work from top to bottom. You just go down methodically. The tables that we are going to use are from this book, the Residential Deck Guide. This is from the American Wood Council, and this is kind of the reliable source document. You can download your own copy. Here's the link, but I put a copy of this as a PDF in our course folder, so you can just get it from there. This Residential Deck Guide was developed by the American Wood Council in collaboration with the ICC, the Code Council. That's the group that develops our building codes, the International Building Code and the International Residential Code and so forth. In this deck design thing, these requirements are for one-story decks that are in a residential setting only, so a deck attached to a house. And they do not accommodate heavy things like hot tubs. This is just your ordinary basic deck. And they do not work for heavy snow country, so the snow loads are kind of in a moderate range. When we think about what kind of wood to use, this is a table out of that guide we just looked at, and there are all different kinds you can use. Notice that woods like redwood and western red cedar are naturally resistant to rot and decay, and so you can use those. A lot of people use those for decks because you don't have to replace them as often. You can go all the way down to southern pine, although that wouldn't last that long. We're going to think about making a deck out of Douglas fir because we live in the Willamette Valley. Whatever kind of wood you use, the posts that are going to be in contact with the ground or with the concrete blocks have to be treated with preservative, but the rest of the deck does not. So here is the quiz that we're going to work on today, and let's take this in 2 bite-sized chunks. So we'll begin talking through the quiz, and then we'll stop, and then we'll come back and do some more. This is a problem out of our book, and I don't know if you noticed something that looks really funny here. So this was a problem in the book, and I copied it and redrew it in CAD so that I could show all these views and the isometric and everything. And I just blindly copied what they had in the book, not noticing, did you notice? Where is the door? So this deck is attached to a big old concrete wall with apparently no way to get to it. So that's nice. I suppose you could put stairs on it. Well, anyhow, he tells us that we are going to assume that the decking, this stuff on top that we walk on, is going to be made out of 2x6s. The joists, is these repetitive support pieces underneath the decking. We could do 2x6s or we could do 2x8s, and we'll investigate what the differences are and think about which one we want to use. We're going to use Douglas fir, and by the way, you might notice in correct botanical lingo, the common name Douglas fir is hyphenated because it is not a true fir. That's why they hyphenate it. So I'm following that. Anyhow, he tells us what the dead load and live load will be. So the dead load is the weight of the beam members themselves, and the live load is whatever you're going to put on it, like your picnic table and your people. But we won't have to think about that because the tables are all set up for working with those loads. The reason for that is that in the building code, here's a table that is repeated in the building code. I got this one from the USDA. So in the building code, if you're doing a residential deck on a house, it is assumed that your live load will be 40 pounds per square foot. If you are doing a heavier deck, or a deck with a heavier load, then we could no longer do that ourselves and we need to hire an engineer. I don't know if you were around Eugene a few years ago. There was a rental house in the South Hills that had a deck on it. It was on a hill, so the deck was up pretty high in the air, and it was designed to this live load of 40 pounds per square foot. Then the people moved out and started renting it out, and some college students rented the house, and one weekend they had a party and invited a lot of people, and all these people were out standing on this deck above the hillside, way more than 40 pounds per square foot, and then they started bouncing around because there was music on. The deck collapsed. No one was killed, and there were only minor injuries, but it's just an example of why these load limits are important. All right, well, let's move on to our deck. So when we design a deck, we start at the top and we work our way down from the top to the bottom. So we'll start with our decking. That's our 2x6 stuff that we're going to be walking on. And the decking, each 2x6 is like a beam. And if you look at this front view here, you see that this beam is resting on some supports. Those are the joists. And think about how far apart you might put those joists. Well, if this is a 2x6 laid flat, obviously you probably could not put those joists 12 feet apart. This thing would sag too much. You probably couldn't put them 6 feet apart. It would sag too much. How close do you have to put them is the question if your decking is 2x6. And in the tables, when they say joist spacing, what they are talking about is how much distance does that decking span. So here is this first table in our thing, and we are going to look for the joist spacing, which is the span that the decking can span. Notice that in this table, they don't differentiate by species of wood. All the pieces of wood are the same numbers no matter what species you have. So we have a decking material that is 2x6, and according to this table, we could space our joists 24 inches on center, 24 inches apart, and still be able to support our decking. We could go closer if we wanted to, but we can't go farther than 24 inches. Okay, now let's look at the side view. Here's a joist sitting on two beams, and the spacing between the beams, according to this, we have to put our beams 8 feet apart because that's our design. Now here's the joist spanning across that 8-foot beam spacing. And so let's start working through the tables. Here's table 2. When you are reading tables, it's important to slow way down. There are a lot of numbers, as you can see, and you need to just slow down, look at what all these headings and labels say, and try and figure out what is going on. So we are trying to figure out how far apart the beams can be. Is 8 feet going to work? First of all, what kind of wood are we using? We're using Douglas fir. So what I'm going to do is get a piece of white paper, 2 pieces of white paper, and I'm just going to cover up the numbers I'm not interested in. That will make it easier, at least for my little pea brain. So that's what I did here. Okay, now when it says joist spans, what it means is how far apart are the beams. So first let's look at 2x6 joists. If we put our 2x6s 24 inches on center, how far apart can the supports be? What is the maximum span? So there's a 24-inch on center joist spacing. The joists will be 24 inches apart. If we're using a 2x6 for our joist, looky there, our beams cannot be any farther apart than 6 feet 10. But we already know that our beams are 8 feet apart. So if we're going to use 2x6s for our joist, 24 inches on center is not going to work. So if we want 2x6s, how far apart do we have to put those joists so that our beams can be at least 8 feet apart? So there's our 2x6s. Oh, look there. There's something that is at least 8 foot apart. It's actually 8 feet 4. And what column is that? That's the 16-inch column. Okay, so we could put them 16 inches on center. What about if we wanted to use 2x8s? How far apart do those joists have to be? There's a 2x8. Oh, look, even if we use 24 inches on center, we have plenty of leeway. Our beams could be over 9 feet apart. Yay! So now let's think about how many joists we need. And depending on the size, they'll either be 16 inches apart or 24 inches apart. I want to do a little figuring here to figure out how many I need. So I want to get all my units into the same units. I want everybody in inches. My deck is 12 feet wide. 12 times 12 is 144. My deck is 144 inches wide. What if I'm using 2x6s? I have to put those 16 inches apart. 144 divided by 16 will give me 9 spaces. What if I'm using 2x8s? I can put those 24 inches apart. 144 divided by 24 is 6 spaces. So let's say I'm using those. Here's my 6 spaces. How many do I need? Well, 6 spaces actually means 7 joists. Look at that. There's a joist on each end. So 6 spaces means 7 joists. 9 spaces means 10 joists. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll restart in